Gabby Doolan came into the world on December 26, 2007, in the small town of Scottsville, Kentucky. With a population of a little over 4,000 residents, Scottsville was primarily a farming community where most people either knew one another personally or at least recognized someone from each local family. As with many other small towns, there were not many entertainment opportunities available in Scottsville. The main attraction for the townspeople was school sports, especially football. The local school had fairly good fields for football, baseball, and tennis, where games and competitions were often held. Over time, it turned into a kind of tradition for community members to attend these events, especially when their children were participants. Gabby's family was no exception. Her parents had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. The eldest son played on the school's football team, while Gabby herself became involved in cheerleading. In November 2015, when Gabby was 7 years old, the town was preparing for the most important football game of the year. Their school team was scheduled to compete against another county's team, and everyone was excitedly looking forward to this event. Although Gabby's older brother was on the team, she was more interested in simply playing around and enjoying time with the other kids rather than watching the game itself. At first, her parents intended to leave Gabby at home with their youngest son under the supervision of a relative, but Gabby persuaded them to let her come along instead. On the evening of November 14th, they made their way to the school field. Aside from the local crowd, there were also numerous people from the other county who arrived to watch the game and cheer for their own team. The moment Gabby's family entered the stadium, Gabby noticed her friends and asked her mother if she could go play with them. Her mother agreed but reminded her to remain within the school grounds and stay close to the other kids. After that, her mother went to sit in the bleachers while Gabby ran off to join her friends. From then on, Gabby ran back to her mother several times before leaving again to continue playing. At one point, she also went to her father, who was inside the announcement room. Gabby asked him for some money to buy snacks from the concession stand before hurrying off. Sometime later, Gabby's friends came running up to her mother in the bleachers. She looked at the group and immediately realized her daughter was missing. The girls asked if she had seen Gabby. They appeared clearly worried. The woman responded that she hadn't seen her for quite a while. She then asked what was wrong, and the girls explained they had been playing hide and seek. Gabby was supposed to find them while they hid in the restroom. But time passed, and Gabby never showed up. Believing they had won the game, the girls left their hiding place and went to look for her, but Gabby was nowhere to be found. They called out her name, checked all the areas where they had been playing earlier, but their friends seemed to have vanished without a trace. That was when they thought Gabby might have gone back to the bleachers to her mother and hurried there. Her mother instantly began to panic and went over to her husband, but Gabby wasn't with him either. She told him their daughter was missing, and the man immediately rushed off to search the area around the stadium. Meanwhile, the mother went to the concession stand, where Gabby had wanted to buy snacks, and began looking for her there. On the way, the parents ran into friends and told them about their daughter's disappearance. After hearing that, they joined the anxious parents in the search. When the entire area around the stadium was searched with no trace of Gabby, the parents returned and made an announcement over the loudspeakers, hoping Gabby would hear it. But this effort also failed. By then, there was a break in the game and people were coming back to the bleachers. The parents continued asking around if anyone had seen Gabby, and some people joined in to help search as well. They went out again to look around the stadium area and asked the staff to turn on flashlights at the baseball field, which led toward a small wooded area. The adults walked through it, but still could not locate the girl. At this point, about 20 minutes had already passed since her disappearance, and the parents decided to contact the police. Officers quickly arrived at the school, listened to both the parents and Gabby's friends, and began searching. The local police force had very limited experience with such serious cases, as missing children incidents were extremely rare in their small town. The officers instantly considered the worst-case scenario, that Gabby might have been abducted or attacked. In such a situation, they faced one major problem. The likely suspect was probably still at the stadium watching the game, which was set to end any moment. So the officers realized they had little time before people would begin leaving, including the possible perpetrator. In the end, they decided to stop the game and lock down the stadium, keeping everyone inside. Officers were stationed at every exit to make sure no one slipped away. The police did not inform the public about what was happening in order to avoid disrupting the search. If everyone became aware that the police suspected a kidnapper of a 7-year-old girl was in the same area as them, the situation could spiral out of control. Meanwhile, state police arrived at the school and expanded the search. They reached the baseball field and moved into the woods. After going some distance into the trees, they came upon a small creek and saw the girl's body inside. They identified her as Gabby and called for an ambulance to transport her body to the medical examiner. However, even a simple visual examination suggested that the cause of death was asphyxiation, as there were visible marks on her neck. Part of her clothing was missing as well, leading police to believe the victim had been brutally assaulted. Gabby's mother saw the ambulance near the woods and assumed the police had found her daughter alive and in need of help. She rushed toward it, but the police stopped her. They did not want her to witness such a horrific scene. Now that the police were dealing with a murder, they decided to move everyone from the stadium to the school gym. Investigators believed the killer was likely among them and needed to quickly figure out how to identify him. They then spoke with Gabby's parents and explained what had likely happened to their daughter. Investigators also asked whether the parents had any suspicions about who might have committed such a terrible crime. Perhaps they had noticed someone unusual or received threats against their family, but Gabby's parents insisted they had no idea who could have done this. Detectives then questioned Gabby's friends, asking if they had noticed anything strange that evening. Perhaps someone had been following or watching them, but the girls said they could not recall anything like that. The police also brought them into the gym and asked them to carefully look at the people gathered, hoping they might recognize someone, but it led nowhere. The lead detective continued to believe that the victim's friends might have seen the kidnapper, but either they were too afraid to identify him or did not fully grasp the importance of what they had observed due to their age. He kept urging them to recall every moment of that evening, and eventually, one of them mentioned that when they hid from Gabby in the restroom, she saw a man standing near the door. The girl remembered very few details about his appearance, except that he was wearing a denim jacket. The police then spoke to the cashier who had sold tickets for the game, and he too recalled a man with a denim jacket hanging on his arm. He also said the man seemed odd and intoxicated. Still, they were unable to identify this individual at that moment. The police gradually interviewed all the people at the game, and soon everyone realized why they were being held inside. Understanding they might be in the same room as the killer frightened them, especially parents of young children, but they still cooperated and answered the officers' questions. Investigators compared the names of all the men in the gym against the sex offender registry, but there were no matches. They also sent officers to visit the homes of several registered offenders who lived nearby, but each one had solid alibis and none were close to the school. Meanwhile, officers continued questioning people at the school and eventually came across some notable leads. Multiple individuals reported seeing a man named Timothy Madden near the women's restroom during the game, behaving oddly. He was a local resident and well known to many, but witnesses said that evening he acted suspicious. They also noted that he wore a denim jacket, matching the description provided by one of Gabby's friends who had seen a man near the restroom. Another witness, a distant relative of Timothy, mentioned that during the game Timothy appeared somewhat off. His younger son was playing on the field, and according to the witness, Timothy, who was usually very engaged with his son's sports, wasn't even paying attention and seemed distracted. Several more witnesses told the police that Timothy's behavior struck them as unusual, prompting investigators to question him. By then, it was already nighttime, and the police had to release almost everyone from the school. They decided to visit Timothy, but first asked the local sheriff for his opinion about him. The sheriff said he had known Timothy nearly his entire life and strongly doubted he was capable of such a crime. Timothy had virtually no criminal history aside from some traffic violations and had never been involved in anything suspicious before. He lived with his wife and 5 children, and the police chose to go talk to him right away. When they knocked on his door, Timothy opened it and the officers asked if he knew why they were there. He answered that he had heard about the girl's murder but had nothing to do with it. Detectives then attempted a tactic and asked him a loaded question. They inquired whether he had an explanation for several videos provided by eyewitnesses showing him speaking to Gabby shortly before her death. In reality, there were no such videos or witnesses. The question was meant to trick him into revealing information if he was involved. At first, Timothy said he didn't know, but then quickly corrected himself. He admitted that he did speak to Gabby that evening near the stadium. He claimed he had stepped outside to smoke, and while there, several girls ran past him. Shortly after, Gabby came by and asked if he had seen her friends since they were playing hide and seek and she needed to find them. Timothy said he pointed her in the right direction and she ran off. Detectives found it suspicious how quickly Timothy changed his story. Moreover, his account placed him with the victim only minutes before she disappeared, and at that time there were no witnesses outside, which gave him the chance to commit the crime. The detectives also asked whether he would have any explanation if his DNA was found on the victim's body, and Timothy calmly answered no. Finally, they requested he provide a DNA sample along with the clothes he had worn to the stadium. He agreed to both, but once Timothy handed over his clothing, officers noticed stains on them. There appeared to be blood stains on his pants, denim jacket, and even underwear. Detectives asked for an explanation. Timothy claimed they were mistaken and that the stains were dirt, not blood. But the police suspected otherwise, although they still needed the DNA test results before arresting him. Even though the case was prioritized for the lab, it still took several days for experts to analyze all the samples. The forensic pathologist soon completed the examination of the body and confirmed that Gabby's cause of death was manual strangulation. He also verified that the victim had been brutally assaulted and collected a biological sample from the perpetrator, which was sent to the lab. The day following the murder, something unexpected occurred. Police received an anonymous letter from someone reporting a suspicious man at the game. The author included the car model and license plate, allowing investigators to quickly identify the owner. It turned out to be a student living half an hour from Scottsville. Police went to question him, but he insisted he had not attended the game and hadn't even heard about the murder. He also said he was at work that evening, and police found undeniable proof of his alibi. He was cleared as a suspect, but the anonymous author was never discovered. Perhaps someone was attempting to frame him or play a cruel prank, but the young man turned out to be innocent. Soon after, the police received another lead. Several individuals reported strange behavior by a local 16-year-old boy. He told different people that he had been at the game, then later claimed he hadn't gone. The young man also said he had seen girls playing hide and seek. Detectives learned this boy was Timothy Madden's son, but that was not the most shocking discovery. They found out that just 2 weeks before the murder, the boy had become angry with his father and held a knife to his throat, threatening to kill him. Armed with this information, the police went to speak with him, but they faced a problem. They needed the presence of his parents, and his mother refused to provide a DNA sample. This left investigators with nothing. In Scottsville, a town where everyone knew one another, rumors spread like wildfire. Word got around that the police were investigating the Madden family in connection with Gabby's murder, fueling countless theories. Some suspected one of Madden's troubled older sons might be responsible, while others believed Madden himself was guilty or covering for his children. Gabby's parents eventually heard the rumors, which shocked them deeply. Gabby's father had known Timothy since the 3rd grade and was familiar with his entire family. Their sons played on the same football team, and their daughters were cheerleaders together. The two families were close, even sitting near each other during the game. Considering all of this, Gabby's parents found it very difficult to accept that someone from their own circle could have been responsible for the murder. After these rumors spread, something else occurred. The eldest son of the Madden family, who was 20 years old, began contacting local police officers through social media. He used profanity and threatened them, demanding they stop targeting his family. He was immediately arrested for making threats, and officers quickly uncovered that he had an outstanding warrant in another town. It turned out he was suspected of assaulting a minor girl, When brought in for questioning, the young man said he was simply angry about the accusations against his family. He also maintained he had nothing to do with the murder, and that he was at his cousin's house in a nearby town that evening. He agreed to provide his DNA sample, which was also sent for analysis. On November 20th, 6 days after the murder, Gabby's funeral was held. Hundreds of people attended to say goodbye, not only from Scottsville but from neighboring towns as well. People donated a considerable amount of money to Gabby's parents to help cover the funeral and memorial costs. Meanwhile, the lab completed the DNA analysis and compared the blood and semen samples against Timothy and his son's DNA. The results showed a perfect match. The semen on the victim's body belonged to Timothy Madden, and the blood on his clothing belonged to Gabby. With this confirmation, detectives went to the funeral. When Gabby's parents were alone, they informed them they had identified the killer. At the same time, police officers went to Timothy's home and arrested him. As he was being taken from the police station, he shouted to the reporters outside that he was innocent. Later, he claimed the blood on his clothes was his own, saying he had scratched himself on a fence. But as we recall, he initially told police it wasn't blood at all, but mud. With the DNA match secured, investigators brought the case to court, and the prosecution announced they would pursue the death penalty. During trial preparations, Timothy's lawyer argued his client was innocent, and that the evidence raised serious doubts. He claimed that during the alleged murder, Timothy was at the stadium filming the game, despite Timothy himself telling police he had seen Gabby around that same time. The lawyer also highlighted that Gabby's body had been found in a creek, yet his client's clothes were dry when he returned to the stadium. Timothy's mother, who lived with him, testified that he came home wearing clean clothes, looking calm, and acting normally. However, the prosecution countered that these arguments collapsed in light of the semen evidence on the victim's body. There could be no alternative explanation for this, leaving no doubt about Timothy's involvement. According to investigators, his account of that night likely contained some truth. He may indeed have stepped out of the stadium during the game and encountered Gabby, who was searching for her friends. Since she knew Timothy as the father of one of her friends, she might have approached him for help. That was when he could have come up with a plan. He might have told her they went into the woods behind the baseball field and offered to guide her there. Once they were several hundred yards from the school, he could have assaulted and killed her before returning to the game. The trial itself dragged on for years, to the great frustration of Gabby's family. They wanted the murderer punished, but due to bureaucratic delays, the case moved very slowly. In 2019, for years after the murder, discussions began about a possible plea agreement. The prosecution offered to drop the death penalty in exchange for a life sentence, requiring Timothy to admit guilt. Gabby's parents agreed to this deal, as the endless wait for trial was an unbearable weight on them. Moreover, if the trial had gone forward, they would have been forced to attend hearings for months, reliving their daughter's death over and over again. Timothy, who kept claiming he was innocent, eventually agreed to the deal and confessed. However, the terms of the agreement did not require him to reveal the full details of what he had done. He only had to admit his guilt. These conditions did not satisfy Gabby's family, who wanted the perpetrator to fully confess to everything he had done to their daughter. During the court session, Gabby's father began shouting at Timothy, while Timothy's relatives yelled back at Gabby's family. Eventually, the judge had to pause the hearing and separate both sides. In the end, Timothy was sentenced to life in prison and transferred to a maximum security facility. But that was not the end of his story. In 2016, a year after Gabby's murder, something else came to light about Timothy Madden. A boy from a neighboring state saw a news segment about the crime and recognized Timothy. Several years earlier, he and a friend had been walking near a mall parking lot when an adult man approached them. He tried to lure the boys into his car for a ride, but they found it very suspicious. The boys ran away, and the friend's relative contacted the police. According to the boy who later saw the news report, that man had been none other than Timothy Madden. There was no concrete evidence in this case, so it did not advance further. Nevertheless, if Timothy had indeed attempted to abduct two boys in another state, it could shed more light on his true nature. Perhaps before Gabby's murder, he had already been searching for victims but had failed. And on that evening, when Gabby approached him near the stadium, he decided to seize the chance to carry out his horrific fantasies. If you found this case intriguing, make sure to like and subscribe. We upload new crime case videos every night. Stay tuned and brace yourself for what's coming next.